Prometheus and Alien Covenant are fire movies, and you cannot convince me otherwise. Also, yeah, I know I look chopped right now. My fault. I need my hair to grow back desperately. I'm not normally this chopped, I promise. Okay, now let's talk about Prometheus before we get to Alien Covenant. But first, if you're new, you should subscribe because I would greatly appreciate it. I have goals of being a YouTuber one day, and I started, a week ago? And I think I've made some pretty good progress so far, not to toot my own horn or anything. So if you like the video, you should subscribe. But without further ado, let's get into it. We're starting off the movies with the big, jacked, bald, white guy movie, also known as Prometheus. In my opinion, this is a top 3 movie in the Alien franchise. Yes, I said it. And by top 3, I mean it's number 3. It's not better than Alien or Aliens, but I would take it over Romulus. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not saying Romulus was bad or anything. I think Romulus is a really good movie, but my problem with Romulus is that it doesn't do anything new. And that's the exact opposite of Prometheus, where everything is new pretty much. And that's the problem a lot of people have with the movie, is that there's no xenomorphs until the end, but all the aliens are new, and that just adds to the fun. Also, something I've noticed with the prequel haters is that they hate Prometheus because of no xenomorphs, but they hate Alien Covenant because they get rid of the engineer storyline in favor of 4 xenomorphs. So, like, make up your mind! But I do think that there is some very valid criticisms for Prometheus and Covenant, which we'll talk about them eventually. First, I want to talk about all the good stuff Prometheus does. First off, the engineers. Oh my god, these guys are sick. Also, it probably goes without saying, but yeah, there's going to be spoilers in this video. So basically, what the engineers are the people who created humans, which is why they look exactly like humans. And the black goo, that's what I'm going to call it. I don't know if there's another name for it. I don't think there is. But the black goo is what gives things life. And Prometheus sacrificed himself for humans to have fire in Greek mythology or Norse mythology, whatever it is. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. Then I look like an absolute idiot. But in the same way that Prometheus sacrificed himself so humans could have fire, the engineers sacrificed themselves for humans to have life, which is why at the beginning of the film the engineer drinks the black goo and then just disintegrates. And after he disintegrates and goes into the water, there's a new life form made. And that life form eventually evolves to become humans. Now, if you watch this movie without watching any lore videos after or reading anything about it, I could understand why you would find this movie disappointing and confusing. A lot of the specifics about the engineers are literally told through paintings. But here I am to give you the super interesting lore of the engineers and the humans. So, I love whenever movies like this incorporate religion. I don't know why I like it, I just think it's cool. But that's what Prometheus does. So basically the engineers create humanity and watch over them over time. But then the ancient Romans come around and they start acting diabolical. And the engineers, at least at the time, were all about peace and creation and all that good stuff. So the engineers decided to send one of their people down as kind of like a prophet. And the engineer that went to Earth tried to turn humans from bad to good, in which case he was crucified. Now, if that sounds familiar, which it probably does, this is good old Jesus Christ's story. So basically, in the alien universe, Jesus Christ was an engineer sent by other engineers. This is obviously just a story. I mean, don't act like I'm saying that this is true. It's not. And so basically, the engineers were understandably really mad about that. And there might have been a civil war between engineers. So you have the destroyers and the creators. Now, the creators, they didn't care. They just wanted humans to live out their lives. But the destroyers were mad. So they decided to get a bunch of black goo inside those juggernauts, the big wishbone ships, and they were going to fly it over Earth, drop it, and if you've seen an Alien Covenant, you know what was going to happen to humans. But something happens, something malfunctions, and the juggernaut has to emergency land on a planet. And eventually there were stories told about this through cave paintings, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. And that takes us to the year 2093, no, not the Yeet album, the year, where Elizabeth Shaw and Max Holloway eventually find those engineer cave paintings. And they find out the location of the planet that was drawn in the cave. So, not gonna lie, that is kind of convenient. But who cares, it's a movie, things are gonna be convenient. And that leads us to the beginning of Prometheus. In the year 2093, humans have become their own creators, like the engineers that predated them. And that's where we're introduced to David, the second coolest character in the entire Alien franchise, with Ripley being first, obviously. But Michael Fassbender is so talented, it's insane. Like, how does he do it? I'm a Michael Fassbender meat rider. He's absolutely the perfect casting choice for David's character. He can convey emotions while having a straight face, which, yeah, other actors can do, but it takes a really special actor to be able to pull that off. Which is perfect for the casting because, I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but David's not real. He's an android. Not really a robot, but he's an artificially created human, like in Blade Runner, but more artificial than the replicants in Blade Runner. And David is the first android ever made. Androids are in every single Alien movie, so that's where the big connection between movies happens. But the androids that we see in the original Alien movies, they don't have any personality. They're just a program. That's all they are. But David, he has a consciousness, but nobody knows that. So basically, he has a human consciousness, but he's in a fake body. And David is just pure evil. Like, pretty much everything bad that happens in Prometheus is because of David. And I actually find David super similar to another iconic antagonist, Am from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. For those who don't know who Am is, in the story I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, basically Am is an AI created by humans, but it gained consciousness. And it basically despises humanity for creating it because humanity gave it life without the freedom of living its life. It's like if God made you, but trapped you in a little metal box for your whole life, for all of eternity actually. So basically, to get back and release its frustration on humans, it tortures 5 selected people for all of eternity. And David is a lot like that. He despises humans for making him, and like belittling him basically, whenever in his mind, he is so much better than them. Because the crew members of the Prometheus kind of view David as like we view a Roomba. Not real, just a program, just a fake artificial thing. But unlike a Roomba, David actually has a human consciousness. So he takes offense to everything. And he gets fascinated with creation. And his fascination with creation would ultimately lead to the creation of the xenomorph, the perfect species, but we'll talk about that later. But basically the main character, Elizabeth Shaw of Prometheus, gets Peter Weyland, the CEO with fake lizard man makeup, to fund a trip to the planet that the engineers said that they would be on, to go to them because they believe the engineers want to see them, and that doesn't exactly turn out to be the truth, obviously. But of course, since it's a big shady CEO, his real mission is to have the engineers grant him immortal life, because the one thing that Peter Weyland, the CEO of Weyland, aka like the big monopoly of the alien universe, he's terrified of death. And he's like super self-conscious that one day he will die, unlike David, which he perceives to be perfect. Also, I don't know if I mentioned it yet, but Peter Weyland built David and kind of sees him as like a son because he never had a son and he always wanted a son. But that's not really that important in the movie. It doesn't really amount to too much. So basically, at the beginning of Prometheus, which the ship is called Prometheus. I don't know if I mentioned that yet. I feel like there's a lot of important things I'm not mentioning, so if I'm not, let me know. Basically, the Prometheus flies around the alien planet until it finds a structure, or at least what they think is a structure. He says gods don't build in straight lines, and there's a straight line leading right to this temple-looking thing, so yeah, that's pretty certain that it's, not natural. And so they touch down right next to the temple, and they were going to bring weapons, but the main character goes, nope, no weapons, which, yeah, makes no sense. That's one part of the movie I do not like. First time I watched this, I thought they were going to have like a run-in with a creature whenever they don't have weapons, but nope, she just said no weapons for no reason. They could have had weapons the whole time. And a group of like 8 people, I think, I don't know. They go into the alien temple. They look around and they find out that there's an artificial atmosphere being created, so they have terraformer engineers too. And so they all decide to take their helmets off so they can breathe, which, again, is another thing that doesn't really make much sense, but that's not important. So basically, all the important characters you need to worry about are Elizabeth Shaw, the main character, Max Holloway, her man, David, obviously, I've already talked about David, he's the coolest character in the entire movie, and Peter Wayland, who I've also talked about. Also, Idris Elba's in this movie. I didn't really have a place to say that. I just wanted to say it because I love Idris Elba. I think everyone does, so that makes the movie that much better. So basically, Elizabeth and Max Holloway are the leaders of this expedition, and they're the ones that wanted to go there. And none of the other people really respect them that much, because if you think about it, we saw some cave paintings about a planet, and we decided to go there to see if they created life. Saying that up front wouldn't make too much sense. But basically, Elizabeth and Max's mission are to go in there, find the engineers, and ask them why they made humanity. So basically, they're in there looking for the engineers for a good while. And they eventually, David, eventually triggers a security, playback hologram system, where it shows the engineers in their armor running. One of them trips and falls and gets decapitated, and once the hologram ends, they see that engineer's body still laying there 2,000 years later. And so David android Michael Fassbender does, he goes and opens the door that the engineer was decapitated by. And there they find the head of an engineer. And so basically they take it back to run experiments on it. And there's a big storm thing, and it's a really cool scene. And Michael Fassbender comes out, saves Elizabeth, saves Max, as he always does, because he's Michael Fassbender, baby. And then they take the engineer head in the med bay or experiment room, I can't tell, and they perform experiments on it. And they eventually find out that the engineer was wearing a helmet the whole time. So they take the helmet off, and it looks to be a very humanoid face. And then they decide to try to do some super sci-fi space tech stuff to make the nervous system still think it's alive. But after they do that, the head ends up exploding, just like Alex Adams. And basically everyone's super depressed and grossed out because they think all the engineers are dead, which most of them are. But we'll find out later that maybe not all of them are. A little spoiler, but yeah. Also, I just realized I forgot to mention a super important detail. So David, the android, he found jars of the black goo that I talked about at the beginning of the video. And so he took one of those jars with him, so he's going to get up to some devious things with that. And David gets a little drop of the black goo on his finger, says a really cool line, big things have small beginnings, and then finds Max Holloway, Elizabeth's lover, all alone in the pool fun area, as in pool, not like a swimming pool, but the game pool. And he's super depressed, lonely, drinking booze, as one does. And keep in mind, David still has that black goo on his finger. And so basically he talks with Holloway. Holloway insults him because, he has no soul, he can't feel feelings, and that really sticks with David. He hates being belittled like that. And so David asks the question, what would you do to find out the truth about what you're looking for? And Holloway says anything. And so David sees that as the consent he needed. And so David pours a drink, dips his finger with the black goo on it, and gives it to Holloway. Also, I should have mentioned that after they went to the alien temple, two guys decided to split off to try to get back to the ship, but they got lost. I don't know why I didn't mention that. I don't know how I forgot about that, but I did. I'm sorry. Now, only one of these guys are really important, so I'll tell you his name. It's Fifield. Keep that in mind. The important guy is named Fifield. He strikes me as the type of guy that if he was, not in a sci-fi movie, he would be a part of Jack's gang in Breaking Bad. But basically, Fifield and the other guy are walking around trying to get back, but they find out they can't because there's a huge storm, like I mentioned before. So they're walking around doing their generic character dumb stuff until they find a mountain of dead engineer bodies. Also, it's not important now to mention, but I'll go ahead and mention it for the future, but Fifield, whenever he was with the crew, he has these two robot drone things that look for life or anything of interest, and those things are basically searching through the temple structure alien thing looking for life. Also, I low-key lied, that information will be important right now. So basically, as Fifield and the other guy are doing their thing looking at the mountain of dead bodies, the drone gets a ping of a life form. And so Fifield and the other guy, they go down to investigate, where they see these alien worm snake things that can open up their like ball sack looking things to make it look like a cobra. And after the other guy Fifield's with is trying to like pet it for some reason, the cobra, it's not a cobra, I don't know, I don't remember what it's called, but it jumps in the dude's mouth and chokes him to death. But before they do that, Fifield tries to cut it off with a knife, where it sprays acid blood onto his face. Fifield falls down right into a puddle of the black goo. So yeah, hot take, but that's not very good. And then the next important thing, we get a lovely scene of Max and Shaw, Elizabeth Shaw, you know, the two main characters. Well, Max isn't really a main character, but Elizabeth Shaw is. Max brings up that she's infertile and then they bang. So that's always good. And keep in mind, Max is infected with the black goo pathogen. And after they bang, they go back the next day for a science mission to go back in and figure out what Fifield and the other guy are doing. But on the way there, I think it's after they get there, they're walking around for a bit, and Max Holloway seems to be like melting. Like, it's crazy. And dude is not doing too hot, to say the least, so they decide to, you know, bring him back as well as everyone else. But on the way back, Vickers, what's his name? Peter Wayland, I don't know why I couldn't remember his name. But his daughter, which I haven't mentioned yet because she hasn't done anything yet until now, she's on the ship, but you're not supposed to know that she's his daughter. You're not even supposed to know that Peter Wayland's on the ship, but it doesn't really matter. And, well, it does, but I want to talk about it. But they're trying to bring Max Holloway in, but Peter Wayland's daughter, a.k.a. Vickers, she's like, nope, not going to happen. And she's holding a flamethrower, to which Max Holloway just says, do it. And Elizabeth is watching the whole thing as Vickers flames her husband to death. Anakin Skywalker reference, yeah! And so Shaw passes out from the volume of the situation, and she wakes up to David doing like a scan and medical stuff on her. And the moment she wakes up from her husband dying, he's like, yo, did you and Mr. Holloway bang? Kind of wild. She just woke up from passing out from her husband getting scorched to death, and you're like, yeah, did you bang? Did you ever do that? I know he's dead, but like, come on now. And she's like, yeah, last night. And you remember how Holloway was infected with the black pathogen goo thing? And they banged? David says that she's 3 months pregnant. Basically says it's not a traditional fetus. And puts her back into a coma. And then she wakes up. She beats the other two people up, which, yeah, didn't make any sense. And then she runs while like screaming in pain because, you know, she's got an alien inside of her womb that can't feel great. And she makes her way open to the med bay. And this proceeds to be one of the hardest moment to watch in the entire movie. The med bay thing cuts her open, pulls the alien out, and stitches her back up. And like, I'm just explaining it. It's bad. I don't even know if I can show it. You should just watch the movie for yourself and see it. But then she gets back to the room she was just in, and she sees Peter Wayland being woken up and getting his nasty old feet massaged by David. And he basically explains that they're going to go in there to find the last living engineer. Yes, while David was snooping around inside of the temple, he found one last engineer in a cryopod that looks a lot like the cryopods that they use in their ship. So they travel the same way, I guess. And Peter's going to ask them if he could have eternal life. And also, I should say, up to this point, David like worships the engineers. He sees them as like perfect creators because they're creators like David is a creator. But that all changes whenever David finds out that the engineers aren't perfect. They're not immortal like he is, so he views them as lesser. So basically there's 4 people that went in to go see the engineer, Elizabeth being one of them, David being, there's 5 I think. Peter Wayland, his 2 guards, Elizabeth and David all went to see the last living engineer. And basically the engineer wakes up, he's shaken up, and he looks at, David, Peter, Elizabeth, and his 2 guards, and he's kind of amazed how they got there. And also, this engineer is an absolute monster. Like, this guy puts Sam Sulek to shame. And David actually talks in the engineer language, which the engineer actually seems impressed, proud even, like a proud dad. Maybe he was having second thoughts here. Maybe he thought, humanity wasn't too bad. It seems they've evolved. Until Elizabeth started freaking out because they were going to kill humans and all that. They found that out eventually. And Peter Wayland has one of his security guards hit her in her stomach, where the whole surgery took place. And the engineer's like, yeah, you guys haven't changed. But he's still impressed by David until he actually, touches his forehead, and then he realizes that he's artificial, he's not real. And so he proceeds to pick David up, snap his artificial neck, and rip his head off, and then beat Peter Wayland to death with it, and started running and pushing and throwing the other security guards and killing them. And so Elizabeth escapes because she's the main character. Of course she's going to escape. And this scene is so sick. The ground starts to open up. Apparently it was a hangar for a ship. You know that Wishbone ship that I talked about at the beginning of the video and from the first Alien? That thing rises up, and the engineer is what we saw at the beginning of the first Alien movie. And the ship reaches up to go to Earth to kill all of humanity, but Idris Elba, being the cool guy he is, picks the Prometheus up and slams it right into the ship, destroying the Prometheus, but knocking the Juggernaut, Wishbone ship, whatever you want to call it, down with it. And no, I will not be talking about the infamous scene where they're running in a straight line whenever the Juggernaut's falling in a straight line. We're not going to talk about that. So apparently before the Prometheus crashed, Vickers launched an escape pod. Vickers is Peter Wayland's daughter. She launched an escape pod to live. But the moment she gets out of the escape pod, she gets crushed by the Juggernaut falling. So yeah, that sucks. And Elizabeth Shaw, almost dies to the Juggernaut, but barely makes it out alive until she gets a Subnautica type warning saying that she has 30 seconds of oxygen left. And she sees Vickers' escape pod module thing. And so she runs to that at the last second, makes it in, and seals the airlock so she can breathe again. Whoopee. But you remember that whole surgery scene and how she pulled an alien out of herself? That thing's grown. And it's in the med bay of the escape pod. And that thing is massive, like the low taper fade me. So she picks up an axe to defend herself whenever she gets radioed by David. Yeah, David the android is still alive because he's an android. He can get his head ripped off and be fine. That's just how it is. And he says, he's coming for you, run. And she's like, who? But then she quickly finds out. It was the engineer. He survived the whole time. And the engineer barges into the escape pod, tackles Elizabeth Shaw down, and so she has no choice but to unleash the creature that, she cut out of herself. And the creature latches onto the engineer, it's a parasite, so it latches onto him, basically fuses with him, and we get to see at the end of the movie what happens after that. But Elizabeth lives, at least for this movie. And David radios to her that he can drive the ships if they work together, and she basically rebuilds him, reattaches his broken head. And the movie ends with Elizabeth and David taking a Juggernaut up in the air and flying through space to go to the planet where the engineers live. But wait, there's more. You remember the engineer and the thing that, what's her name, Elizabeth cut out of herself? They fuse together, and engineer gets chest birded. Are we serious? It gets chest bursted, and something known as the Deacon emerges from the engineer. Now, besides the Deacon looking absolutely sick, its lore implications are really cool too. So basically in engineer lore, there were no female engineers left. It was all men. So they had to find a way to reproduce. And so they created, I think it's called a trilobite, the thing that Elizabeth cut out of herself. So they created the trilobite to attach to an engineer to create the Deacon, which they view as the perfect organism, which the Deacon's kind of like a prototype to the xenomorph that we all know and love. And also in a comic, the Deacon becomes like a mountain. So, yeah. My only big complaint I have with the Alien prequels is that it feels like there should have been a movie in between Prometheus and Alien Covenant. Because so much happens in that elapsed time off screen, and I feel like it just doesn't feel right. Also, I'm going to try to summarize Alien Covenant super fast because I really want to get this video out tonight. But basically the whole storyline that was left unanswered at the end of Prometheus leaves unanswered in the movies, at least. Even in Alien Covenant, which is the sequel, which I still think is a great movie. It's like everything I loved about Prometheus except with xenomorphs. So basically the plot of Alien Covenant is that there's these 2,000 colonists who get woken up in a solar storm. Also, there's two Michael Fassbenders. There's David and Walter. Walter is the android that's going with the crew that's in the ship full of colonists. And Walter is good. Walter likes humans. He's programmed to like humans, whereas David hates humans. So they look the exact same. They're the exact same model and species, but one hates humans, one loves humans. David hates, Walter loves. And a solar storm happens where it causes the death of 46 colonists and wakes up, I think it was 16 other colonists. So it's kind of a good news, bad news situation. The bad news is they lost 46 colonists, but the good news is they were woken up right next to a habitable planet. Whereas the planet that they were originally set to go to and colonize is still another 7 years away. And obviously, since the whole solar storm happened, they don't want to go back in the sleep pods. I wouldn't want to either. So the colonists go to this new planet, and they walk out, and they're not wearing masks, but the weather's breathable. There is some bacteria that could get in your system, but they gotta move the plot forward somehow. But as they're there, two crew members step on these spores, and these spores release a pathogen. One goes in a guy's ear, the other one goes in a guy's nose, and they infect them with something known as the neomorph. The neomorph is a prototype stage of the xenomorph, just like the Deacon was. And one neomorph bursts out of a guy's back paws, and the other one comes flinging out of a guy's mouth, and there's a lot of blood involved, and it's super gross and disturbing. The CGI for the baby neomorph doesn't look the best. I think it's the only thing in this movie that doesn't look great. Speaking of which, the xenomorph and the neomorph are the best they've ever looked in the franchise. They look even better than Romulus is, because I feel like in the first Alien movies, it was too obvious it was a costume, and in Romulus it was too obvious that it was an animatronic. But in Covenant, it looks so good. And instead of stalking and hunting its prey, the xenomorphs in this movie, which I know they technically aren't xenomorphs, it's a neomorph and a protomorph. Or a praetomorph, I can't remember. But they're highly aggressive, stupid aggressive. I'm not saying stupid in a bad way, I'm just saying it's insanely aggressive. And so basically one of the pilot ladies tries to shoot the neomorph, misses, and blows up the ship. So that's all good. And the neomorph that got out of the guy's mouth is half grown, and he starts attacking everyone. One guy gets his jaw whipped off by its tail, which looked super cool. And in the midst of a chaos, they get flashbanged like it's Rainbow Six Siege. And the guy that shot the flare up into the air that flashbanged everyone, it's David. I'm going to kind of spoil what happened in the events between the two movies. So basically, David kind of grew a liking to Elizabeth in a way. And he offered Elizabeth, he's like, hey, do you want to go kill all the engineers and kind of reign as gods? And she was like, no. And so David proceeded to torture her and experiment on her for the next 10 years. And we get possibly the coolest scene in the entire franchise, other than the scene in Aliens where Ripley and Newt walk into the alien queen's little lair. I still think that scene is just absolutely undefeated. But basically, David takes one of the Juggernaut Wishbone ships, flies it over the engineer population, and drops all of the black goo on him. And we get to see what was going to happen to the humans happen to the engineers because of David. And so David leads him to this lair that he's been hanging out with, and him and Walter play the flute together in a very suggestive way. I'll do the fingering. Whereas the crew that went down to the planet's trying to communicate with the big mothership to come down there and get them, but there's a storm interfering with the signal, so they can't get a hold of them. But basically the Neomorph comes back fully formed this time, and it looks like a Demogorgon from Stranger Things, and it completely decapitates a girl and proceeds to have like a blowing contest with David, where it seems to like David actually. But then the captain of the crew that went down raises his gun and shoots the Neomorph to death, which David is completely distraught by. I mean, Michael Fassbender acting is so good. And the captain points the gun at David, and the captain's like, "Tell me exactly what's going on here." And David's like, "Right away, sir." And so he takes him down to this little lair where we get to see a familiar sight if we've seen the first Alien movie. It's a bunch of alien eggs, ovomorphs if you want to be specific. And one of the ovomorphs open and latches onto the captain, which this means that captain is the first facehugger victim, other than maybe Elizabeth Shaw, in the entire Alien timeline. And the crew on the planet finally gets signal with the crew on the big mothership, and the people on the big ship decide to send a cargo lift down to pick them up and bring them back up into space. But before that, they gotta find the captain. The captain was passed out from the facehugger attack, but is woken up by David throwing pebbles at him. And the captain wakes up, says, "What do you believe in, David?" And David says, "Creation." And the first chestburster is born, or at least what might be a chestburster. It doesn't really look like a chestburster. It looks like a small xenomorph, but it still looks pretty cool. And the xenomorph being the xenomorph, it automatically grows to full size. One of the guys that was sent looking for the captain, he becomes another facehugger victim, but he manages to get the face... Oh, I cannot speak. Oh my god. He gets the facehugger detached from his face with a knife, which scarred his face because of the acid blood, obviously. But the guy that detached the facehugger gets mauled to death by a xenomorph, but the facehugged guy gets to leave. The cargo ship has arrived, and the main girl, which hasn't done anything yet, so I haven't had to mention her, that guy and Walter, the good alien, or not alien, android, get to leave. Also, I forgot to mention like a really important scene. Walter and David have a full-on fight after they kiss each other, because David hates Walter for liking humans and hates him because Walter cannot feel emotion like he can, and he's like kind of views Walter as a mistake and a disappointment. And so the main girl, Daniels, finds out what David did to Elizabeth Shaw, and she's like, what did you do to him? And David goes, "Exactly what I'm gonna do to you." And David tries to force himself on her. Also, before this, David deactivated Walter. I keep starting sentences and then realizing I forgot to explain something, so I gotta go back and explain it. But basically all that happens, and David's trying to force himself onto her. But Walter comes clutch, grabs David's shoulder, and throws David to the wall, and we get a full-on android fight for the first time in the Alien franchise. And also keep in mind, both characters are played by Michael Fassbender, so you can't tell if they switch. But basically, Walter beats David, but as Walter's about to deal the finishing blow, David grabs a knife, and the scene cuts away. But basically, Walter, Daniels, the main girl, and the guy that got face-hugged all escape and get onto the cargo lift. And we get this really cool action sequence where a xenomorph is on the... I know it's technically a praedomorph, but I'm going to call it a xenomorph because it looks like one. It's on the cargo lift, and Daniels, the main girl, is hooked up to the cargo lift with a tether, and she's shooting at it. It's a super cool scene. But eventually the xenomorph is killed, and all is good, at least for now. So everybody gets to the mothership, and everyone's just all fine and dandy. Everything's going great until Daniels gets woken up with the message that there's an unidentified species on the ship, which I wonder who that could be. Yeah, the guy that got chest bursted, he was on the ship, so now there's a xenomorph on the ship they have to deal with. And they eventually lead it into a terraforming bay where they shoot it into space just like every other Alien movie. And a really cool scene where they take the big terraforming trucks and stab it through the chest with it and launch it back into space. And so after that debacle, all of the colonist people are okay to get back into the sleeping pods, but the moment Daniels is locked up in one, she asks Walter a question that only he would know. It's about a cabin on a lake. She really wants to build a cabin on a lake. And she's like, "When we get there, do you want to help me build my cabin on the lake?" And we find out that that's not Walter, that's David. And so, yeah, they're all going to get tortured and experimented on. So, yeah, that's where the movie ends. And I need to see a third movie. Oh my god, you don't understand. I have an idea that I think would be really good. So the ending to Romulus, which I probably won't spoil, but warning just in case I end up saying something that would be spoiler heavy. I need them to intertwine the stories with Romulus and the ending of Alien Covenant, because that would give it a reason why, Romulus happened in the middle of the David trilogy. They should have Rain and Andy meet up with David and all of his experiments and have them fight each other on Yavaga. So I think that would be a great movie. It would provide both an ending to David's story and a sequel to the Romulus story. Also, I'm pretty sure Daniels was created into the first xenomorph queen ever. And so basically that's how the xenomorph spread, because the xenomorph didn't really have a way to reproduce until the queen was made, and that was David's last addition to his perfect creation. And so yeah, David created the xenomorph. And basically everything that happens from that point forward in the Alien universe can be traced back to David in some way or another. David is both a creator of new species like the xenomorph, as well as a destructor of species like the human race. He sacrifices humans in order to make new, better, perfect species in his opinion. Because just like he said, to create, one must first destroy. Okay, I think I hit about all the points I wanted to in this video. I really wanted to talk about the Alien prequel lore and just get that out there that I think they're great movies. I think these are absolutely magnificent movies and do not deserve the hate that they get. If you haven't watched the movies yet, you definitely should. I think they're worth it. And if you watch this far, that's absolutely insane to me that someone thinks my content is high quality enough to watch the whole way. That means a lot. So I'll probably realize a few hours after the video that there was some points that I forgot to touch up on, but I'm sorry about that. And I'll probably make another Alien prequel video in the future, so stay tuned. I plan on making an Alien iceberg next, because I said I'd do that in a community post I deleted. So I'll get to that. I want to make a video about Fallout. I want to make a video about Subnautica. I do want to make more videos about Breaking Bad, all those things. Just anything I find interesting, I want to make a video on. So if you're interested in those things, you should definitely subscribe. I would appreciate it a lot. Okay, I think I've touched upon everything I want to get to. Again, there will probably be... I cannot speak. I sound like I'm speaking gibberish right now. I'll eventually probably make another Alien prequel video, because I plan on making a lot of Alien videos, because Alien is my second favorite franchise of all time, right behind Star Wars, of course. I absolutely love Alien. I think the Xenomorph is the coolest alien in all of fiction. Fight me on it. But other than that, I think that's about it. So, see ya. I did the Moist Critical ending, so hopefully you appreciate that.